You're listening to Resistance Radio.
Welcome to Resistance Radio. I'm your host, John Nugent, and my guest today is the founder of Resistance Radio, Mr. Jack Sen over in Great Britain. Jack, how are you today?
Pretty good, John. How are you?
I'm just fine. Today we'll be talking about things going on racially in the United States, and in particular as they're affecting hockey in the National Hockey League and the National Football League, and finally a really shocking church shooting in Tennessee where a black immigrant marched into a white church and started blazing. And the media is not saying it was a racial hate crime, but you've done some research on what this man was posting on Facebook.
Yeah.
So, Jack, you know a tremendous amount about hockey. Please tell us about your own hockey background.
Although I was born in Britain, my mother's English, I grew up in the Northeast, and I played hockey as a kid. Up until college, I played intermediate hockey in high school, and then I played intramural hockey at university. And then I did a little training in Sweden with hockey players in the Allsvenskan, which is the second league in Sweden. And I've been a hockey fan, probably more importantly for me, for probably 30-odd years. I've not missed a season in about 10 or so seasons in the NHL. And before that, I probably, in the United States, followed 15 years straight of NHL seasons. It's just a love of mine, ice hockey, and that's why it's quite tragic for me to see what the mainstream media, in particular NBC, who televises NHL games in the U.S., how they're trying to goad the good, decent hockey players in the NHL into a racial conflict that they want no part of. And when I say that, I'm talking about predominantly the players of color, the black and one half Mexican player named Auston Matthews, who plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs in particular, how they've tried to goad these players into some sort of response that would be supportive of Black Lives Matter and NFL protests. But thus far, they've failed miserably. They failed utterly miserably to get these players to do as they're bidding.
I see. Well, in the National Football League, which is 70% black, you had 200 players refuse to stand or, put their hand over their heart for the national anthem, but they kneeled down on the grass. But you're saying in the NHL, there's been no response like that?
No. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a player named Subban. He's of Caribbean origin, although he grew up in Canada, I believe in the outskirts of Toronto. He comes from a good family background. His parents were principals in a high school. His father was a principal. And the media have, tried to get him to say something, but he's not wanted to. But recently there's been a tape released of him joking around at a comedy club where he was up on stage for some sort of a charitable event where he said he will not be protesting, although he's black, not his thing. He respects the flag, the Canadian and the American flag. He respects the fans in Nashville. He plays for the Nashville Predators, Stanley Cup runners-up this last year. I think what's interesting about Subban is he said all along that although he's black, he doesn't identify himself as a black player. He identifies himself as an NHL player who just happens to be black. So I think that's very different in stark contrast to someone like Michael Bennett or Colin Kaepernick, who identify themselves as blacks first and athletes second. There's another example of like I mentioned earlier, Auston Matthews, who's a top player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's an incredible player, a wonderful athlete. He's only about 19, 20 years of age. I believe this will be his second season coming up. And his mother is Mexican because he grew up in Arizona. And of course, we're in the Trump administration, so they right away sought out Auston Matthews. And Matthews responded brilliantly, saying that he's extremely pro-American. He respects the flag. He said members of his family in the military, including ones who served in wars past. And he thought this was all political nonsense, and those were his exact words. And then there's, most importantly, I would say, probably the face of the NHL, a player by the name of Sidney Crosby, who plays for the Pittsburgh Penguins, a region of the country where you're from, or where you spent a lot of your life. And he is the captain of the Penguins. They just won the Stanley Cup. And Donald Trump invited the Penguins to the White House, as is customary after championship season. The team gets invited to the White House. And Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins graciously accepted the invitation, and they said they were looking forward to it, and it was an honor to see President Trump at the White House. Although they have been attacked relentlessly by NBC and the liberal media for the decision to go to the White House, they are still going, and I think that says a lot about the sort of players in the NHL, the fact that they respect their fans, they respect their countries, and of course, like you said earlier, the NHL is a predominantly white sport, and the black players that are in the NHL, I would say are predominantly from good families, middle-class backgrounds, two-parent homes, for obvious reasons. And you mentioned, I think, off air, the cost of the equipment.
Costs money.
Yeah.
Costs money to get the skates and the padding and all the equipment. You almost have to be a middle-class black or upper working-class black to have a dad bringing home an income to outfit you and all that equipment.
Yeah, it's very expensive. I mean, we're talking about thousands of dollars a year, immense amount of traveling. It's not as simple as, like we discussed off air, just shooting hoops in a park down the street from your building. One has to travel to a rink, which could be across town. You have to travel to other communities to play other teams. Yeah, it's a very expensive sport. You have to rent ice time, skates every year, new skates, and they can be extremely expensive. Bottom end, $50, $60. Top end, $600, $700. So we're talking about an extremely expensive sport. And also it requires a commitment from the family, which other sports do not require. Hockey is truly a family sport. If you go to an ice hockey game, a peewee or a midget game or a junior game, it's just full of families. It's not the same thing at a basketball game. It's more fans. Ice hockey is a family game, and I think it attracts better people, and I believe that these people just are not having any of this BS from the BLM, race-baiting NFL crowd. They don't want any part of it, and I think it's admirable, and it makes me, I would say, almost proud to be a hockey fan.
Well, when you look at the NFL, I think what's happened last Sunday when 200 players boycotted the national anthem, I think they're really violating a taboo, Jack, here in the United States, which is that sports is a race-free zone where only excellence and courage and persistence counts. And, it was supposed to bring our society, even the most divided cities. There's racial tension, for example, in Pittsburgh. But, everybody loves the Steelers, everybody loves the Pittsburgh Penguins, and people come together for that. But it seems like it's being divided. There was a picture went around the internet of a Marine in his dress blue uniform, a sergeant, and he's standing up, so to speak, on his elbows, hoisted himself up, rigid-armed, in his wheelchair because he has no legs. And he's standing up in this way for the national anthem at an NFL game. And that went around the internet. Like, this guy lost his legs for his country.
Yeah, of course,
and
yeah.
These black players, are refusing to honor the country. And it seems to me it's like they're inserting and intruding race and complaints about non-sports issues onto the sports field. And a lot of white fans, and there's videos, not just white fans, Hispanic and some black fans, they're burning their NFL jerseys.
Excellent.
Which are very expensive.
Of course.
Now, I have to say, I've not been happy with President Trump. He seemed to be sort of giving the middle finger, to one of the owners, Robert Kraft, of the Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. I don't think the president should be giving people the finger. It's supposed to be presidential. The other thing is he made a reference. He used the phrase "son of a B," B-I-T-C-H.
Yeah.
Again, that's Donald. You're president.
Yeah. I agree with you.
It was true.
No, I agree with you. But I think what's important here, and I think it segues nicely to our next topic, is the sort of people that have created this problem in the NFL. I mean, we're not talking about people who are with a genuine grievance here. These are people that are, multimillionaires, and it's all started with this Colin Kaepernick, who's in fact half black, half white, comes from a white family because he was adopted, and he's a Black Lives Matter supporter, and he wears T-shirts with
white Jewish fan.
I think so, yeah, and I think he also wears T-shirts supporting Fidel Castro. So if you look at the actual Black Lives Matter movement in general, it's not a pro-black or a anti-police brutality movement. Is really a Marxist movement. I mean, one need only look at Black Lives Matter's websites to see what it's all about. And I can actually
What does it say on their website? Is it just about white police brutality, or what's their main agenda?
No, that's the interesting thing. Obviously, I mean, I come from a family, we're quite distrusting of the police due to the fact that we're nationalists, and my father ran for office in the U.S. and was a hardcore conservative, and we're not a black family, but we've had a lot of problems with the police, including violence and aggression. My mother was roughed up by the police when she refused to comply with an officer's demands about 10 years ago, who was harassing us. I've had some run-ins as well, so I'm not exactly pro-police. And if there was a movement that was genuinely against police brutality and some of the major players were in fact black, I would be supportive of that movement. But this is not about police brutality. It's not about Black Lives mattering to anybody. Because if you read the website, if you go to the About Us segment on the website, which is entitled Principles, I'll read a bit of it. Black Lives Matter is a unique contribution that goes beyond extrajudicial killings of black people by police and vigilantes. It goes beyond the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some black communities, which merely calls on black people to love blacks, live black, and buy black, keeping straight, cis black men in the front of the movement while our sisters, queer and trans and disabled folk, take up roles in the background or not at all. So that's a very interesting statement because they basically are criticizing traditional black empowerment movements led by black men. And this is basically saying that heterosexual black men in the past have kept trans, disabled, and homosexual blacks in the background. This right away is a cultural Marxist movement. This is not a pro-black movement. It's an anti-conservative, anti-tradition, anti-heterosexual movement. And they continue, Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of black queer and trans folk, disabled folk, black undocumented folk. So again, queer, transgender, disabled, illegal immigrants, folks with records, women, and all lives along the black gender spectrum. So they don't even mention heterosexual males. And if you look at victims of police brutality, I mean, the one common denominator is that they're men, whether they're white or black men. Police brutality, it rarely impacts women, disabled, or trans people. I mean, if you look at the vast majority of instances where the police have been found guilty of attacking or mistreating someone under arrest, it's been a man. So this movement is a straight man. So this movement is obviously has nothing to do with police brutality. It's a cultural Marxist movement that ticks all the cultural Marxist boxes. Wow.
So it sounds like something that George Soros, I'd heard, is financing BLM and adding a lot of agitation.
Yeah.
We can all agree that there are brutal cops, and this is a problem around the world. The final item we want to talk about was this Tennessee shooting. 2 years ago, some national hysteria began because a white supremacist still in Storm Roof went into a black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and with a handgun shot and murdered 9 churchgoers who were doing a Bible study. Obviously a heinous crime. After that, there would begin an avalanche of denunciations of white supremacism, down with the South, down with the Confederacy, take down Confederate statues, and so forth and so on. This is continuing to this day. Now, this seems to be a parallel incident, but on the other side, with a black militant going into a predominantly white church in the South, also in Tennessee, where I ran for Congress, by the way, and nearly won in 1990 in the Republican primary. And that was my district, actually. It's about 10 miles southeast of downtown Nashville, Tennessee. And he shot and killed a white mother of 2. He shot his own minister. He had attended this church. The story is he used to be a Christian. He's from the Sudan, on the southern Sudan, where they're racially black. They're actually Christians down there in the southern half of Sudan. And originally he was posting pro-Christian stuff on Facebook.
Yeah, I remember.
But it seems like he changed and really became sort of a BLM anti-white militant in his recent posts, didn't he, Jack?
Yeah, he did. I mean, it's remarkable. I'd say literally within the last 18 months, there was a shift in his politics from being, like you said, just a typical Facebook poster and who was quite pro-Christian in many ways. Most of his posts were supporting Christianity. But I'd say in the last 6 to 8 months, especially since Donald Trump won the election, his posts have taken on a vastly more racially charged manner to them. I'll read something that he posted on social media. He wrote, "White terrorism, which includes you're more likely to be killed by a white man than a Muslim terrorist, yet Trump is considering a ban on Muslims and not white men? Stop falling for stupidity so easily." Yeah. So, and then he talks about colonialism and slavery and how whites have been oppressing blacks for centuries. He then goes into Black Lives Matter movement. He tweets, "A former neo-Nazi and current anti-hate activist explains why the threat of white extremism must not be ignored." He posted an article by Ezra Klein, who runs Vox. So this is not someone who's mentally ill, as they've described in the media, or some kind of angry immigrant. He was raised in the United States. He turned hostile towards white America in the last 6 to 8 months. And one can only presume he's been radicalized by the mainstream media and the Black Lives Matter movement. So, because he's promoted a lot of Black Lives Matter material on social media, and the vast majority of his posts on social media are anti-white. So you have a mainstream media and an establishment that's literally promoting this idea that whites are bad and hostile to blacks and racist and this, that, and the other. And then you have someone who then goes and shoots up a white church, and you hide the fact that this person is linked to this sort of politics.
But there was definitely coverage, CNN and Fox, of the incident, but no racial angle whatsoever was mentioned. And there's no call to take down statues of Martin Luther King or anything after a black man shot some white people, including his own minister from just 2 years ago. Yeah. And his wife. The minister's in critical condition. His wife is in serious condition. So their crime was the color of their skin, apparently. Yeah. Well, Jackson, thank you very much for your expertise on these topics. And thank all of you for listening today to Resistance Radio.
You're listening to Resistance Radio. You're listening to Resistance Radio.